More important and more significant, I think, for future trends is to take a look at what is happening in Egypt. In Egypt right now, the two main forces, aside from the military, which is currently running the country, are the party of President Mubarak and the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is not a uniform organization. It is not an organization like Al-Qaeda. It is an organization that has various branches and has various orientations. And to just generally say that nobody should let the Muslim Brotherhood come to power would be nonsense. But the point is that in recent weeks and months, a lot of hardline Islamists have been let out of jail in Egypt. And a lot of them have been brought back from exile in various countries, in Syria, from the war zone in Afghanistan, from various other places. And little by little, you see them taking over. You see them taking control of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is an organization that spawned Hamas as a terrorist organization. It has very close relations to Hezbollah, and it was a long-time supporter also of Osama bin Laden. And if that organization is taken over by hardline Islamists, then I think Egypt, and with Egypt all of us, have a problem. That currently seems to be going on. If you look at the little signs, you will find that when the revolutions began and when you had these demonstrations at first in Tahrir Square, most of the people had young faces, they were enthusiastic, they were pro-democracy. If you look at more recent demonstrations, you find a lot of older people with long beards, people who evidently command a lot of support in the groups that they have around them, and that are really more the kind of Muslim Brotherhood that we need to worry about, not the one that ultimately would go for representative democracy. Of course, you can't really talk about the Middle East without talking about Israel. And what are geopolitical problems for many of us, for Israel, they are really existential problems. Think of how the situation for Israel has changed. They used to have a long-standing peace agreement with Egypt. That agreement is now in question. The Muslim Brotherhood and various other organizations in Egypt have raised question marks over this agreement. Even al-Baradei, who supposedly is a Western-oriented leader in Egypt, has said that you can have an agreement with a country, but you can't have an agreement with one person. This agreement was with Mubarak, therefore it should not apply to Egypt now. With Egypt no longer fully reliable as a border country that will not attack, with Egypt now opening the border crossing Al-Rafah into the Gaza Strip, there's a new threat that Israel didn't have before. Gaza is a new threat as well, because Gaza now suddenly has access to a channel through which weapons can be filtered into the region. If you go further north, there's Lebanon. Lebanon is currently run by Hezbollah, an organization certainly devoted to the destruction of Israel. Then there is Syria. Now, if anybody is a pragmatist, it is an Israeli, because the way they live in their area, they have to be. For them, Syria has always been a hostile country, but they also fully realized that while before Assad's father, Syria used to be a country subject to frequent coups. That changed when the old Assad took power, and since he and the young Assad have run Syria, not one single shot has been fired across the border between Syria and Israel. So in other words, the Israelis are saying he may hate us, but at the very least, he has kept the country stable, and we didn't have anything to worry about from that angle as long as he was around. Then you've got Iran. Iran clearly devoted to the destruction of Israel. So Israel is today in a position that is much, much worse than it was at the same time last year. And Israel truly has a lot to worry about. That means we do too, because after all, Israel is one of the main countries that we support in the Middle East. I'd like to spend just a minute on talking about the farce that I always believed to be the idea that all you have to do is settle the Palestinian issue in the Middle East and the region will be peaceful. That has never been true, it is not true now, and it will not be true in the future. You could settle this issue right now and the situation would not be any better for Israel or for the rest of the world. What is really the problem in the region, and what one really has to watch, is this struggle for supremacy between Iran on the one side and Saudi Arabia on the other side. In other words, the question of whether you're looking at the Gulf of Arabia or the Gulf of Persia. Iran has taken advantage in a major way of the unrest that has been taking place in the region. It met the irresistible force when it tried to get involved in Bahrain. And that, as you know, triggered a Saudi Arabian appeal to the rest of the Gulf Cooperation Council to bring in troops, to bring in police, to bring in the Navy, the Kuwaiti Navy, and to make sure that Iran will not be able to gain a major foothold in Bahrain. Iran for many, many years has claimed Bahrain as a province. This was supposedly settled years ago under the Shah, when the Arabs paid the Shah substantial amounts of money for him to say that he will abdicate all claims to Bahrain. Now apparently those have been resuscitated by the Iranians, and of course they would love the idea of having a foothold in a place where they have a causeway, a land access to the very country that they hate most in the region, and the country where they would most like to see regime change. In essence, what I'm talking about is control of the oil. Is it going to be controlled by Iran, or is it going to be controlled by the Sunni Emirates and by Saudi Arabia on the other side of the Gulf? And these Emirates and Saudi Arabia are concerned about what the King of Jordan once called the Shia Crescent, this Shia rule that the Iranians have been trying to establish, which reaches from Lebanon through Syria, through the south of Iraq, through Iran, and then down to Yemen, where the Ismaili tribes in the north are essentially Shia, and ultimately to Somalia, to support from groups like Al-Shabaab.